But to start out, the acceleration of the new Reich. This is, Teddy, what's his last name? Teddy Wilson over at Radical Reports. Radical Reports is just a great Substack newsletter. And he published one last week that had, I think it was Friday, that had just a whole series of links in it to, things that, what's going on right now. And so I went through those links and a few others and came up with, I think, what's a pretty good overview of what's going on in America right now. Keep in mind, most all of this, there are two exceptions, but outside of them, all the rest of this is stuff that has just happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's getting more and more brazen. I mean, this past weekend, there was a group of Nazis who marched through downtown Nashville, complete with swastikas, giant swastika flags, and racist chants. The media treated it like it was just another day. This stuff is getting normalized. Republicans who run Texas are in open defiance of the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal government over the border. That's the most significant challenge to federal authority since 1832 and the nullification crisis. And indeed, it's stirring up new pro-Civil War rhetoric among the racist base of the GOP. Andrew Womack, who's a televangelist and a big Republican supporter, who called COVID a hoax hyped by liberals as an opportunity to come against Trump. Recently, on his podcast, Truth and Liberty, he said, quote, "I've actually had people say that if Trump was to be elected, if we got a conservative Congress, that they fear we would have another civil war. And you know what? I don't want a civil war. I don't know anybody that does, but would it be worth it to turn this nation back? I believe it would be worth it." Right. I was in the middle of a civil war in Uganda in 1980. And in fact, one of my colleagues was shot dead. Her name was Anne. She was an Irish Red Cross worker. I just don't think anybody calling for a civil war has actually ever been in one. Because once you've seen what a civil war is like, you don't want them. Anyhow, Nikki Haley has been swatted twice. She's been physically attacked on stage. She's now being stalked at campaign events by Putin-loving Trump supporters who are outraged that she's calling for more military support for Ukraine. Jacob Ware, the author of Guns, God, and Sedition, told the CBC, quote, "I think intent to commit violence is high across the political spectrum, but especially on the far right." And he talks about our gun laws, facilitating that. Just days after Maine Secretary of State Shayna Bellows ruled that Trump had committed sedition and couldn't be on the state ballot, she was swatted. Judges Tanya Chutkin and Arthur Engeron have been targeted by fascist Trump followers. A Trump devotee armed with a hand at Pelosi's home and tried to beat her husband Paul to death. On the campaign trail, Trump regularly refers to the incident as if it was some sort of victory for him, encouraging his supporters to do the same again. Another apparent Trump follower just last month murdered and decapitated his own father because he was a federal employee and therefore part of the deep state that Trump said we got to destroy. When the Washington Post looked into this problem of, the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, found that fully 23% of Americans agree with the statement, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. And the Washington Post looked into it and found that people running for Congress had to increase their spending on security by over 500% between the time Trump lost in 2020 and last November's midterms. The Brennan Center for Justice questioned 1,700 state and local elected officials in all 50 states and found that fully 40% have been either threatened or physically attacked in the 3 years since Trump lost. 90% said that they have been harassed, intimidated, or stalked. 1 in 10 state legislators report that a person with a weapon had tried to intimidate them on one or more occasions. 1 in 5 state officials and almost half of local officials say that because of these threatening to deal with controversial issues like abortion, immigration, or gun control. I mean, it just goes on and on. Last year, Republican anti-abortion extremist Philip Bunyo loaded his car with a hatchet, flares, matches, and bottles and cans filled with gasoline, and then drove to a reproductive care center, Affirmative Care Solutions, rammed his car into the front entrance, told police when he gets out of jail he's going to finish the job. He says he's part of this rescue group with a bunch of guys who have signed the justifiable homicide statement, saying if you kill abortion doctors, that's all good. Last week, an openly Nazi group marched in front of the home of Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. In Idaho, 31 hateful white supremacists had the case against them dismissed because FBI agents and local prosecutors had accidentally bungled the evidence and interrogations. Last week, a Tennessee man was arrested for trying to participate in a plot with 2 Texas men to visit the southern border and murder Border Patrol agents, along with any immigrants who happened to be standing around. One of them was in possession of 6 semi-automatic firearms, 20 magazines, and around 1,800 rounds of ammunition. The border has been flooded with immigrants ever since Moscow Mike called a press conference and said, the U.S. border is wide open. Johnson, of course, the Speaker of the House, has openly promoted the Great Replacement theory. He said, here's what he said. This is, quote, if you're scratching your head, you've seen the video, you've seen droves of people, 2.4 million people coming over the border illegally, the president allowing it, the Democrats in charge of Congress are allowing it. The deal is they're going to turn them into voters. Right. That's not the deal, as you well know, I'm sure. But, you know, the Great Replacement theory, this was Hitler's theory about Jews. You know, they're out reproducing us. Recently, a convoy of armed white supremacists calling themselves God's Army made their way to the southern border, echoing Trump and Hitler's rhetoric that dark-skinned immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. The FBI had to evacuate the Border Patrol Processing Center because of threats from right-wingers. A few days later, Paul Fay Sr., identified as a malicious sniper, was arrested for planning to murder Border Patrol agents. He thought that if he could kill a few, that would start other white people going out and killing other federal employees. This was, you know, basically the premise of Turner Diaries, the novel that motivated and inspired Tim McVeigh. Fay said that it was the Great Replacement theory, you know, quoted by Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, that caused him to want to go murder these people. I mean, America's Voice is a news, you know, agency, and they said America's Voice has identified 120 members of Congress who amplified the replacement and invasion conspiracy in their official capacity just this last year. We've identified over 1,040 times top Republican candidates, officials, or outfits pushed the bigoted fiction in just the last year. We also identified this disturbing practice more than 700 times in 2022. In 2023, the House Republican majority brought 13 witnesses to congressional hearings to promote the Great Replacement theory, including one guy who'd been arrested on January 6th. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I'm not even halfway through the article of all this lengthy list of everything that has happened literally just in the last couple of weeks. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
the Thom Hartmann Book Club today. Our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy. I'm back. I'm back in the studio. I'm testing negative. I don't have COVID anymore, thank God. It wasn't all that terrible, but hey, still take it very, very seriously. I mean, I think I've had 7 vaccines. So anyhow, we're back. We got a lot to talk about today. The GOP's post-constitutional future. Are these guys pushing for a new Gilded Age? I think so. Autocrats, worse than Trump. Be afraid, be very afraid. Also, today is the 2nd anniversary of the Dobbs decision. How has that influenced you and your state? I'll be picking up your calls on that and getting your thoughts. I have some thoughts to share with you, too, which I'll get to a little later on in the program. So, that's our first hour. In our second hour, Jamal Bowman is right, claiming that Israel supports all Jews and the world is dangerous to Jews. Or not supports, reflects, speaks for. This is a dangerous thing. And, what AIPAC is doing right now in New York, I think, is despicable. They did the same thing here in Oregon. They got rid of a solid progressive candidate that, we were all very supportive of, Pramila Jayapal's sister, Sheila Jayapal. And, because she said that we should cut off military support to Israel until Netanyahu stops indiscriminately bombing Gaza. And boom, AIPAC came in and took her out. And they're trying to do the same thing with Jamal Bowman. We'll talk about that in the second hour of the program. This is the election is tomorrow, actually, in New York. And a fascism alert in our second hour. According to an ex-Trump vice president, he taunted Jewish employees with jokes about Nazi ovens. Also, his stumbles are too much even for Fox News. This is wild. I'll get to that in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, the Republicans are now pressuring the Supreme Court to intervene in Trump's successful prosecution, his 34 guilty findings by a jury of his peers in New York City. They want the Supreme Court to intervene, even though it's not a federal case, right? Expect Congress to pass something about this. Also, states are struggling to provide election security. We'll get into that in the third hour of the program. Excuse me, but I wanted to start out with the op-ed I wrote today for HartmannReport.com. It's titled "The GOP's Post-Constitutional Future: A New Gilded Age?" ? And, we keep hearing Republicans talk about a post-constitutional era or returning to radical constitutionalism. What are they talking about? Right? Trump uses this phrase. The Project 2025 people use this phrase to a certain extent. You hear these or variations on these phrases coming out of the mouths of the conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court. So the question is, what do they mean when they talk about this kind of stuff? What really are they saying? And to understand this, you have to realize that there have been basically 2 great eras, arguably 3, but 2 great eras in America having to do with economics and society. And the first was the period from the founding of our republic until 1932. And during that time, really 1913, let's say, okay, the Woodrow Wilson presidency. During that time, there was no federal income tax. Lincoln had one for 3 years during the Civil War, but that was it. So there was no federal income tax. There was no estate tax. Well, actually, that kicked in 1909. I stand, let me fix that, or 1905 or 7, whatever the year was that Teddy Roosevelt got that passed. But basically, women could not vote in 1913. There was no Social Security. There was no social safety net. No Social Security, no Medicare, no food stamps, no unemployment insurance, no minimum wage. There was no right to unionize. If you tried to organize a union, very, very frequently your employers would have you murdered. Sometimes they'd hire local police to kill you. And this was life. In fact, in 1900, as the President's Council of Economic Advisors noted in a 2000 annual report, quote, "To appreciate how far we've come, it's instructive to look back on what American life was like in 1900. At the turn of the century, fewer than 10% of homes had electricity. Fewer than 2% of people had telephones. An automobile was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. Many women still sewed their own clothes and gave birth at home. Because chlorination had not yet been introduced and water filtration was rare, typhoid fever spread by contaminated water was a common affliction. 1 in 10 children died in infancy. Average life expectancy was a mere 47 years. Fewer than 14% of Americans graduated from high school. Widowhood was more common than divorce because of the dire economic consequences of two women of divorce. The average household had close to 5 members, and a fifth of all households had 7 or more. Average per capita income in $1999, now keep in mind, this is the average across the entire United States in 1900, was $4,200. The typical work week in manufacturing was about 50 hours, 20% longer than today. So basically, we had a very, very different country from the founding of the Republic up until basically the era from 1913 to 1932, basically. And then came the Republican Great Depression. And following that, Franklin Roosevelt came into office in 1933 and said, we're going to change this. We're going to create a middle class. Now, America had never had a middle class that was more than half of us. It had never happened before. But Franklin Roosevelt said, I'm going to intervene in the economy. I'm going to balance the power equation between labor and management by legalizing unions. That was the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, 1935. He said, I'm going to give old people security in their old age. That was Social Security. I believe that was also passed in 1935. I'd have to go back and look. He said we're going to have a minimum wage. He said we're going to outlaw child labor. He created unemployment insurance. He created a whole bunch of government programs to put people back to work. He created regulatory agencies and essentially invented the modern regulatory state. And ever since 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt did that, Republicans have been claiming that this is socialism and it's leading us straight down the road to communism. Eventually, the proletariat, if the middle class ever gets too big, they're going to rise up against the rich people and pull out the guillotines, and it's going to be the French Revolution all over again, and we all know what a mess that was, and you don't want that in America. And so you get these libertarian right-wing billionaires, Charles Koch and all his buddies, and there's just a whole bunch of them out there. Many of them say things like, democracy is an impediment to freedom, and women should not have ever gotten the right to vote. And they're unabashed, right? That not everybody should vote, et cetera. And but we actually amended the Constitution. Following the Civil War, you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but I think most notably after the Woodrow Wilson presidency, we got the 16th Amendment, which authorized the income tax, and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And these are things that Republicans want to roll back. They want to roll back the Supreme Court decision in 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut, that legalized birth control. Keep in mind, prior to 1965, birth control was illegal in many states, even for married couples. It wasn't until 1972 that the Supreme Court legalized birth control for unmarried women. That was also the year that women got the right to open a checking account or sign for a home or a lease or a mortgage or whatever without having to, by law, without having to have the signature of a man on that same document, be it a brother, a husband, a father, or in some cases even a son. I mean, this is how far we've come. And the Republican Party and Donald Trump want to reverse all of that stuff. That's what they're talking about when they say post-constitutionalism or radical constitutionalism, is they want to take us back to the way the Constitution was before it was amended with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And they're dead serious about this. And they're working hard at it. And we all need to be taking them very, very seriously. These are the stakes of the election this fall. And if we don't show up, and if our friends and neighbors and relatives don't show up, we may well start down this road to completely Reagan started it, right? Started trying to take apart these programs. And he was quite successful, and the Republicans on the Supreme Court as well. They've gutted so many of our protections.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This election is going to be the big one. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Wow, Tom. Yes, very much on the heels of what you were just saying. This election is extraordinarily important. I want to give you and all your listeners a link that I think is really massively important to listen to. It's long. It's an hour and 20 minutes. I promise you from the first minute, it will get your attention and hold it all the way through the end. It's an interview with the psychologist from Johns Hopkins, John Gartner, Dr. John Gartner, an esteemed psychologist. If you go to YouTube, I'm trying to get this part out first. If you go to YouTube and just search for psychologist gives diagnosis of Trump mental collapse. Psychologist gives diagnosis of Trump mental collapse. It is nothing short of extraordinary and frightening. This man's dementia has so progressed that he's now into clear, malignant narcissism, and it is now morphing into Hitler's kind that involves outright sadism. Sadism, the harm of other people and institutions, and even the country itself. There's no making America
deriving pleasure from same. I mean, we saw this over the weekend.
Personal pleasure from, yes.
Right, when Trump was going on a rant about how he wants fighters. He wants to create cage matches between immigrants and professional fighters.
And he does not care who gets hurt, first or worst.
Right.
He does not care. He's getting tremendous pleasure now, personal pleasure. It bolsters him now. It's all he has going left. And he needs it desperately. We've got to stop this. As this guy says, the only way to stop this threat to the country now is to cut the monster off at the head, and that's to defeat him in November. He said, and then we'll get on with correcting all that's wrong. But if we do not defeat him in November, we are screw-ed.
Yeah, I agree.
And he explains this with such clarity. It will get your attention and hold it. I promise you, I'm not exaggerating this. Psychologist gives diagnosis of Trump mental collapse. YouTube. Everybody needs to listen to this.
I get
Crazy.
it. Okay, thanks a lot, Nicholas. Susie in Willits, California. Hey, Susie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Just want to talk about, tit for tat, reproductive health.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, a woman is scrutinized horribly for anything she does. And men are they're part of the reproductive system, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's no way a woman could get pregnant without a man creating sperm in there.
Yep.
There's
Whether it's
no way.
IVF or not. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, whatever. So what about all these men that are wasting all these, swimmers and stuff, and they're never taking, culpability?
Right. Men are not paying the price when women get pregnant, in other words.
Well, what I'm saying is that they can just be, and
I get it. Susie, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
In a time of gold and glimmer, history repeats. A tale of wealth and power, where the common man retreats. A dream of a middle class, a hope that never fades. But it's not a natural thing in this new gilded age. Oh, the middle class, it's not just born, it's forged by hands in a world that's worn through government's guiding hand. In the marketplace, we build it strong in this new gilded age.
There you go, the new Gilded Age. Government does create the middle class. I mean, it's just that simple. You don't have a middle class without government intervention. It is the second anniversary of Dobbs. I think the thing that is most disingenuous about this, David Pepper writing about this over at his Substack newsletter today, he points out that throughout the Hobbs decision, Alito keeps saying, well, all we're doing is giving this to the people to vote on. We're not making the decision to end abortion or to outlaw abortion. We're simply saying that people can now make this decision for themselves. They can vote on this. And, which turns out to be a lie because of gerrymandering, because particularly the red states, there's a few blue states that are fairly heavily gerrymandered, but mostly this is a red state phenomena. Because they are so heavily gerrymandered, even though 60, 70, 80% of their populations want abortion access, at least under the terms of Roe v. Wade. But nonetheless, they've got Republican legislatures and Republican governors who pass laws to outlaw abortion access over the objection of the majority of their citizens. I mean, Alito was just lying through his teeth, and he knew it. He knew how heavily gerrymandered these red states are. He's no fan of the will of the popular public. He wants to impose his right-wing Catholic religion on all the rest of us, and outlawing abortion. And I say Catholic very intentionally here. Every time I do, I get email from Catholics saying, "Oh, are you anti-Catholic?" No, I'm not. I think Catholicism is a beautiful religion. I love Catholic cathedrals. I have friends who are Catholic. I realize that probably cements in your mind that I'm anti-Catholic, but I'm not. In fact, I think that they should bring back the Latin Mass. But all that aside, the fact of the matter is that the major funder in the United States for decades of anti-abortion and anti-birth control efforts, political efforts in the United States has been the Catholic Church. And, you know, when they stop funding politicians and laws that make it, you know, that outlaw abortion and birth control, then I'll stop criticizing them. It's that simple. But this is, you know, you've got 6 right-wing Catholics on the Supreme Court right now, and this is what they're all about. They're imposing their religion on the rest of us. And, you know, and you're seeing the same thing in these state houses. Now, of course, this has also been picked up by the evangelicals who were pro-choice until 1980. But then, you know, you got this merging of the Reagan campaign along with Jerry Falwell and Ralph Reed, and they all decided that abortion would be the way that they would kind of take people's attention away from the fact that what they were really upset about was Brown v. Board and the integration of public schools. Meanwhile, we're seeing the rise of right-wingers across Europe. This is astonishing. The European elections for the European Parliament, you know, just happened in the last week or two. And this fellow Braun, Gregors Braun, in Poland, he used a fire extinguisher to put out candles on a menorah in the Polish Parliament celebrating Hanukkah, calling the Jewish holiday satanic. He's openly anti-Semitic. He just got elected to the European Parliament. And he's not the only one. I mean, the Marine Le Pen's national rally got 31% of the vote in France. Meloni in Italy is increasing her share. AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the neo-Nazi group, came in second. They got a big boost in the under 30 crowd. Their party member, Maximilian Krall, who says not all SS members were actually war criminals. He was kicked out of the party. He was so extreme because he was giving him a bad name, but he got elected to the European Parliament by German voters. I mean, it's like the far right took first place in Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia and tied for first in the Netherlands. That's insane. Sweden, Finland, and Portugal were the outliers. They did not send right-wingers to the European Parliament. But this right-wing movement that is funded by right-wing billionaires all around the world and giant corporations is spreading, and we need to take it very seriously.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, you know, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in a living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school.
As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority demands that we embrace ambition, as I do, Stacey Abrams.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
With flags they wave and grand proclaim. But look closer and you'll see the founders wouldn't share their glee. Betrayal of the right twisting truth and light. The founders' vision clear, they turned it into fear. From secular foundations, they preach their fabrications. Betrayal of the right in the name of might. America, a secular crown, first of its kind, no church to crown. Yet now they claim divine decree to blur the lines of liberty. Betrayal of the right.
Oh, betrayal of the right. By the way, Mark got a couple of calls during the break from people asking, hey, you've got music on the show again. Where can we find it? Yes, we have music on the show again, and you can find it over at HartmannReport.com. There's a little tab up at the top that says Daily Song, and just click on that, and all the music that you hear on this show is there. And you can download it, and you can share it with other people and do whatever you want with it. We own it. So, picking up your calls here, Declan in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Declan, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Always appreciate listening to you. One quick question. I was just finished listening to your rant on the post-constitutional future. And, you know, this is all the past and the truth. And where you put this information out to those of us who listen to you, those who don't will never be confronted with the truth. And what I'm thinking and asking why this doesn't happen is those that have the bully pulpit in a Democratic Party, vested person would be the president. Why don't they find a way to put this truth out to the masses, where if they choose to research it, they can find out this is the truth. This is the history of why we are where we are today. When Donald Trump is given the bully pulpit on the news every day to spout his lies, why in a situation, and an extreme example would be, of course, the State of the Union speech, which is going to cover a lot of different things, but why can't there be something established like FDR's fireside chats to give people the information on a regular basis where they can research this truth if they want? It doesn't make sense to me, as naive as I might be.
Biden is doing his version of that. I mean, he's doing weekly press conferences. It's just that they very rarely get covered. There's a big debate about this, Declan, within people in the media and observers of the media, of why is it that if Donald Trump farts, it becomes news for 3 days. If Joe Biden announces some major policy that's going to improve the lives of Americans, it's a 15-minute story that vanishes almost immediately, if it even gets covered. And there's a lot of speculation. Some people are speculating that the right-wing billionaires who own most of our media just don't want this to be covered. Others are speculating that reporters have simply decided that, Biden is feeble and therefore that's the story they're going to go with. Others argue that Trump's behavior has been so outrageous for so long that it's no longer news. But that kind of belies the question, why do they continuously report on whatever he says? There's multiple theories about why this is going on. We saw the same thing in 2016. I mean, Donald Trump's outrageous attacks on democracy and the bizarre nature of his personality were by and large not reported. The press, really went into horse race mode and tried to tear down Hillary Clinton because, which brings us to theory number 4, which is that when you have a horse race, people are more worried about the outcome and therefore more willing to watch television and therefore willing to receive more ads for expensive pharmaceutical drugs, those being the major advertisers in television these days. And, these companies are ripping us off terribly, but they're taking some of that money and turning it into TV ads. And the networks just desperately want to have those horse races. So, I don't have an easy answer for you, Declan, but I agree. It's a real problem.
Yeah, it's like when he has the opportunity to say something like you said today, what you said today about the post-constitutional future, you took all of us back to what it used to be like, and people need to realize we're headed there again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Reagan's been working on that, and the Supreme Court has been working on that since the 1970s, and Reagan since 1981. And Reagan's followers now, of course. He's no longer with us.
Well, one last thing is that what prevents Biden and all of his, immediate support from taking the advantage or making an effort to do what you do on a daily basis with us, to put these truths out there and the history, which, a lot of it never even got out to us. I'm the same generation as you, and there's a lot of things like this we never heard of in school.
Sure. No, I agree. I mean, we need to improve civics education by all means, and this is why Republican-controlled states are doing everything they can to diminish civics education and to strip out of civics and history classes, the stories that reflect poorly on white people or might arguably elevate the status of black people or women. But it's going to be an ongoing struggle, Declan. It ain't going to stop. Thank you very much for the call. Susha in Venice, California. Hey, Susha, what's on your mind today?
Trump, I'm sorry. Oh my God, listen to that. Hey, Tom, have you checked out the Shrinking Pod series on YouTube yet?
I have not.
Shrinking Trump podcast. I wish you would. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Shrinking
and funny.
Trump?
Yes. Absolutely.
Oh, as in psychologically evaluating Trump, not as in Trump is getting smaller.
But no, it's actually both.
Because he seems to be getting bigger, his waist.
They're actually showing physically, yeah, but they're showing how his psychological dynamic is actually getting smaller, and that's what I wanted to clarify, is that his malignant narcissism is a personality disorder, which is a separate dynamic from his increasing dementia.
Correct.
So,
He's always been a malignant narcissist, or at least since it became evident in his teenage years, and he was the bully in school. But his dementia is clearly age-related.
Please check out Shrinking Trump. And I wanted to mention that the quote from Can We All Be Feminists, where the judge says to the sexual offender, if I could, I would inflict on you what you have done to your victims, is obviously unaware that anyone who has such a tendency has in fact already had such exact actions done to them. The sexual offenders have suffered what they perpetrate.
Not always, but often, yes.
Okay. And then finally, you know why climate activists are targeting our museums, our wonderful works of art from the past, the world's
went
great art?
They went after the PGA this last weekend. Did you see that? The Professional Golf Association?
Oh, no. No.
They disrupted a golf game.
Yes. But instead of going to the various headquarters of the huge companies that are the ones behind the most egregious violations that actively harm the environment, why aren't they sticking it to them instead of defiling the beauty that is everybody's, Why
Probably because they can't get into them. I try to get into the headquarters of RJR, or ExxonMobil. They are locked up like Fort Knox.
Well, they can picket at the gates, right? I mean, they can go to the gates and defile the signs. They're big corporate signs out at the end of the driveway or whatever, instead of taking it out on the artwork. I just don't understand why they're targeting the art.
I suspect it has more to do with opportunity than anything else, but you'd have to ask them. I don't know, Susha. Thank you very much for the call.
Okay.
Yeah, good talking to you.
You got it.
Yep. Pat in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
I'm back to birth control and aborted babies. It seems to me that men make babies. Why aren't they being punished for unwanted babies? Why?
We had a caller in the about a half hour ago who said essentially the same thing. Why is it that men are never being held responsible for pregnancies?
No.
It's a good question. I mean, the answer is obvious. We have a male-oriented society. We have essentially, our society was built on misogyny. Frankly, thousands of years of religion have been built on misogyny. You could say the deepest roots of our culture are male, our patriarchy. Patriarchy is everything. We have male gods. Yeah. Who decided that gods had to have penises? I mean, where'd that come from? It came from patriarchy. It came from this idea that men should be in charge, and that came out of the biological fact that men are physically, more capable than women, generally speaking, to inflict violence. And so, they use violence to get their way. And you know, now we're seeing cultural violence and societal violence that's, you know, a different kind. It's the same thing.
I think it gets worse than that, because and if you force an unwanted baby to be born, that is child abuse. Why aren't they against child abuse?
Yeah. Well, because they've got this bizarre belief that, you know, life begins at fertilization.
I'd just like to say an old English aphorism. It says, religion is the last resort of the
scoundrel.
Failing scoundrel.
Yes, yeah. I think that is that Mark Twain? I don't recall who said that, but actually it probably goes back to the Ben Franklin era, but it might have been Samuel Johnson. I don't recall, but yeah, you know, religion, indeed. Pat, thank you very much for the call. Well said. 45 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. What's on your mind? I'll be right back with more of your calls here on your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. Once again, COVID-free. I'll be back with your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The hour, I'll be right back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Yeah, as far as this Gilded Age goes, it will definitely, and it may be too late. I mean, we are sliding into fascism. And frankly, as far as like this caller that, I hear this a lot. Why is Joe Biden not giving fireside speeches? Well, he is. He's just not copying the title verbatim. And let me explain. The Nazis during World War II, they became an implacable enemy, right? They were unapologetic. Well, then that's when, you know, FDR started doing, you know, had to really juice up the fireside speeches. And it's sort of like Riefenstahl's, you know, seminal work. One of the greatest propaganda films ever made was Triumph of the Will. That's right. And how did we, the only thing we could do is a series of films to compete called Why We Fight. And that's kind of like the fireside.
We did that in the 50s, you know?
Yes.
I'm sure you've seen them.
Yeah, and it was
they're having a renaissance on social media right now.
Well, my problem is I want to connect Triumph of the Will to this idea of will to power, Nietzsche. But there is no direct connection, all right? But because Nietzsche died in 1900. But here's the deal: is that's basically why we're going to fascism. This is why we have guys like Elon Musk. This is why the guy that called you, remember the guy that called you that kept saying you were a liar about Ukraine? I think he was a left-winger. We have this deference, we've evolved too much towards fascism. We have this deference to our employer, this deference to authority for survival. And these Trump these Trump allies, they believe it is in our best interest. They honestly do, just like the Nazis really did not see themselves as villains. And the problem is we, if we don't, long story short, I am worried about, what I call an Osama bin Randy effect. All right, it's when Randy, she wasn't the only one, but Randy Rhodes is a celebrity, popular. Randy Rhodes once said right after 9/11 that she thought that Osama bin Laden claimed he had nothing to do with it. That's true. He did claim he had nothing to do with it. But she was completely bombarded by, critics, a lot of them on the left wing. They called her Osama bin Randy. And this actually happened to me. It happened to a lot of people that question things. And what I'm worried about is, if Joe Biden doesn't get real, Joe Biden's election is the most important thing to staving off this tendency towards fascism. The other thing is if something happens like a terrorist attack particularly from, what we think is a Muslim adversary, it's going to be the same thing. I mean, people are going to blame Joe Biden. They're going to want a strong authoritarian leader like Donald Trump, and that's it. It's going to be game over.
Right. No, 9/11 resurrected George W. Bush's campaign. I mean, had 9/11 not happened, Bush I don't think he would have gotten reelected in 2004, but, he rode that to the end. You're right, Dave. Dave, thank you. And that's the October surprise that wakes me up at night, is that North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, they're all collaborating right now. And they don't want Joe Biden in the White House. And they know that some sort of really bad international incident that hurts America will help Donald Trump. Dr. Marty, right?
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Between
Do you know Cesar Millan?
40 years.
He's the original host of the Emmy.
That's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American Renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out.
Message to share, tuning in the voices from everywhere. Got a lot on my mind and I'm ready to hear your thoughts and opinions. Come and make it clear. Dial into my show, pick up the phone. Let's talk about the issues. You're not alone. From the latest headlines to the stories untold, we'll catch up on the news. Let's break the mold.
And welcome back. Let's break the molds here. Picking up your calls, Jessica in Austin, Texas. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hey, it's not really a question, but it's kind of something I've been watching for years now. Since, Texas, they had pretty much effectively banned abortion like a year before Roe fell.
Right.
With the 6-week ban.
And the Supreme Court let them do it.
And they let them do it. And then I just wanted to bring up something on the news and everywhere on YouTube. I watch all these. I feel kind of crazy. Like, it seems like nobody really knows. There was like a survey that came out recently, and everybody thought that it was Biden's fault that Roe fell. Like,
18% of Americans believe that, actually.
Yeah, it was like, holy crap. That a lot of people don't bring up the main guy who's working with Trump right now is this lawyer named Jonathan Martin. You know about him, I'm sure. Yes.
I've read about it, yeah. I don't know him.
Yeah, I mean, he's everywhere. He's Heritage Foundation. He's 2025. He made SB8. And he, found this guy in East Texas that's like a preacher. He's a young man, and he calls himself a 38-year-old virgin. I guess he's 41 now. But he's, super proud of it. And he's the one that created SB8. And this lawyer helped him, and they're doing all the travel bans, and they're going into New Mexico. And it's just... I guess my question is, what can we do to expose that guy? Because he's even, he's the one telling everyone to be quiet. We don't want anyone to know what we're doing, and finding all these, he did the Comstock Act. He's just this crazy guy who's super smart, and he's determined to destroy women, I guess. And
he proudly proclaims that he's a 51-year-old virgin?
The preacher, the young man, a 38, 41-year-old, I don't know how old he is now. Yeah, he says he's never been with a woman, but he's the one creating all these laws. His grandpa was the Right to Life guy.
Wow.
One of the 80s. So he grew up seeing all the fetus baby signs,
Yeah.
So he's totally just brainwashed. Anyway, these two men are destroying our lives.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'd say, and they've got their allies, Greg Abbott and and Dan Patrick.
Oh my God, Texas is a mess.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, you're calling from Austin, Texas. I get it. You're ground zero. I hope your Democratic Party is active and organizing.
I mean, we've got Beto, and there's people that are trying, but it's just we're so overwhelmed by the rural vote. My family is all total. I'm estranged from my family. I tried for many decades.
Yeah.
It's okay. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah,
After Roe, I was like, I'm sorry, Mom, that was it.
Yeah, I get it. Well, Jessica, I've got to move along, but I'll let me look up Jonathan Martin and see what more I can learn about it.
I want to expose him. He's hiding on purpose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Well, first off, you might mention Melvin Reynolds. She's a longtime singer. She's dead, but she's talking about unions and how we need to stand up for what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. But my other main course is I happen to be flipping through YouTube, and I came upon Dr. Phil with Donald Trump.
Right.
And part of the irony was in the background where he was doing the interview, it said Dr. Phil with Donald Trump, America Facts. And I listened to this 2-hour thing, much of my degree of upsetness. And Dr. Phil was talking about how he was railroaded and, with the courts and so forth. And I thought Dr. Phil was liberal,
No, he's not. He's a Trump humper.
Yeah, he is. And he's talking about how Trump was railroaded. And I'm thinking, my God, how can he say these crazy things? He's just as, just not as any other person is that think Trump's going to save the world.
Yeah. No, Dr. Phil, has gone down a very strange road. And, I didn't watch the entire interview, but I did watch some clips of it. And I think it's just a flaming tragedy. We're seeing more and more of this. There's more and more celebrities who are supporting Trump. I think we have a real problem here in the United States right now. I do understand it. They hate the same people Trump hates. They don't want more brown-skinned people in this country. They're afraid of gay people. They're afraid of women. I get it, but wow. Rick, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. On the other side of this break, Jamal Bowman is right in claiming that when you say that Israel speaks for all Jews in the world, it puts Jews at risk. I want to talk about that and what's going on in that race, and a fascism alert, too. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
Today, we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would-be voters present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000. In which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era. From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general, and of strict ones in particular, accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting, or restrictions on registration, or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years with variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic tactics, such as ballot restrictions that keep constituencies unfriendly to the GOP from voting, and extreme gerrymanders that have, in effect, built a fortress around the GOP's majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats frequently invoke the GOP's use of these tactics, often justifiably, to raise money and to galvanize turnout. This narrative contains some important truths. Some of the forms that these restrictions on voting access have taken in recent years are diabolically obvious in their efforts to keep constituencies supportive of Democrats from voting. Still others boast the distinction of being more insidiously designed and thus less obvious in their intentions. The book is An Uncivil War by Greg Sargent of The Washington Post.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. Right now there's a fascinating race going on in the Democratic primary in New York State. And Jamal Bowman is being challenged by a fellow who has actually a pretty grim record. Now, the challenger here in Oregon, when Sheila Jayapal, Pramila Jayapal's sister, was running for Congress for Earl Blumenauer's district, she was challenged by a local physician who's actually a pretty reasonable progressive, just had no profile and had no chance of winning. AIPAC came in here in Oregon because Sheila Jayapal had criticized the Netanyahu administration and just wiped her out. I mean, just swamped us with millions and millions of dollars worth of negative advertising, attacking Jayapal and lifting up her opponent. They're trying to do the same thing right now in New York with Jamal Bowman. And the latest thing that they've jumped on is his saying, and he said this, he said, when you as Israel say that you represent all Jews and then you behave badly, it opens the doors for people to make the connection between what Israel is doing and Jewish people, which I think is freaking dangerous as hell. Now, they're attacking him, saying that he's an anti-Semite because he's saying that criticizing those people who say you can't criticize Israel because to do so is anti-Semitism are wrong. And I think he's absolutely right. And, we'd love to hear your opinions on this. But the simple reality, Congressman Dan Goldman is leading the charge against him, pushing back. And the guy that Bowman is running against has also been endorsed by Hillary Clinton. The Clintons deeply in the pocket of AIPAC and always have been. And probably Daniel Goldman too, although I don't know. But the bottom line is that, as Noah Berlasky points out in his newsletter today, his Substack newsletter, he says Zionists, Jewish and non-Jewish, far right and liberal, do in fact constantly claim that Israel speaks for and represents all Jewish people. And he's got a whole series of quotes from Netanyahu saying that. He repeatedly says that he speaks on behalf of all the Jews in the world. He says, Netanyahu, for example, said, Jews know deep in their hearts that they have only one country, Israel. He said, in the same year, he said Netanyahu is one of his top aides said, Netanyahu is the leader of the Jewish world. He's not, he's the leader of Israel. In 2006, Ehud Olmert, who was then the prime minister of Israel, said that Israel's war against Hezbollah in Lebanon was, quote, a war fought by all the Jews. Not true. The mission statement of the Israeli mission to the United Nations says, quote, Israel's permanent mission represents the state of Israel, its citizens, and the Jewish people on the global stage of the United Nations. Not necessarily true. There are a lot of Jews who would say Israel does not represent their worldview. And, just like there are Catholics who would say the Pope doesn't represent me, although they're probably fewer and farther between. Judaism does not demand the same kind of conformity and the same kind of hierarchy that Catholicism does, for example. But this is, what Jamal Bowman is saying, I think is absolutely right. You're seeing people in the United States who are rightly horrified by Netanyahu's efforts to keep himself out of jail, the brutality of his efforts in Gaza, the brutality and violence and illegality of his efforts continuing to support the settler movement on the West Bank. These are things that are violations of international law, arguably are violations of Israeli law. And Netanyahu is thumbing his nose at America and the rest of the world, and the Biden administration seems impotent in the face of this. It's the thing that is really hurting Joe Biden with young Democrats. And the extent to which Netanyahu claims that he represents all Jews in the world is the extent to which Jewish people in the United States, for example, are on the receiving end of genuine anti-Semitism that is being generated by people watching the horrors, the starvation, the famine that's going on in Gaza right now, and blaming it on Jews rather than blaming it on Netanyahu. Netanyahu, yes, is Jewish, and Israel is, yes, a Jewish state, although about 20% of its citizen population is actually Muslim, is Arab. But nonetheless, that does not mean that Netanyahu speaks for every Jew in the world. And Noah Berlatsky, who himself is Jewish, makes that point. He doesn't speak for me, he says. And I think his pointing this out, he says, blaming all Jews for anything done by one Jew or some Jews is definitionally anti-Semitism. It creates grounds for collective guilt, collective punishment, anti-Semitic stereotypes, and anti-Semitic violence. And, he says basically what it is saying that Jewish people as a whole are responsible for Israel's actions, which is not true. He says Israel in the last 6 months has killed or injured some 120,000 people in Gaza, the vast majority women and children. The state of Israel did that, not Jewish people as a whole, not American Jews, not, and Jamal Bowman is absolutely right. He's basically blaming Zionist propaganda, I think you could argue. And this is the phrase that Noah Berlatsky uses. And by conflating Israel and Jewish identity. Now, I get it that there are many Jews who are just, Israel right or wrong no matter what. But there are many who are not. And this idea that's being promoted by AIPAC in this race where they're throwing millions and millions of dollars into promoting and elevating Jamal Bowman's opponent in the primary, knowing that whoever wins the primary is in all probability going to win the general election. Like I said, it's the same thing they did here in Oregon. The Oregon race got very little publicity because neither of the candidates were actual members of Congress who had high profiles. But largely everybody knows who Jamal Bowman is. He's outspoken, he's African American, he's on television a lot, he's a member of Congress, and he's a good guy. So, I just want to say to my listeners and viewers in New York State who are in his district, this primary election tomorrow is going to be, and there's early voting going on right now, I believe, is a very, very important one. And Jamal Bowman deserves to be reelected, and AIPAC should not be spending millions of dollars. I think they've spent $14 million in this race. They spent like $3 or $4 million here in Oregon in this little congressional district. Only 700,000 people. This is just wrong. A foreign government or an agent of a foreign government should not be working to influence U.S. elections. I think it's just plain old flat out wrong. Meanwhile, speaking of Judaism, Barbara Rez, who was Donald Trump's secretary for decades, and finally quit because she said she was no longer willing to tolerate his, quote, explosive moods. She was on MSNBC on Sunday morning, and she said the following. She said, like it was funny that Hannibal Lecter ate people, reminded me of the time when Trump had just hired a residential manager, a German guy, and Trump was bragging amongst executives about how great the guy was, and he was a real gentleman and so neat and clean. And then he looked at a couple of our executives who happened to be Jewish, and he said, watch out for this guy, he sort of remembers the ovens, and then smiled. Everybody was shocked, she said. He was making a joke about the Nazi ovens and eating people. And yeah, this is Donald Trump. He's a big fan of the Nazis. His first wife, Ivana, has, before she died, falling down the stairs, sort of like Putin's opponents. And then got buried on his golf course and wife cemetery, his Roach Motel golf course wife cemetery. She wrote in her autobiography and told reporters that Donald Trump had one book, apparently in the whole apartment, and it sat on the next to his bed, and it was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler. And we're seeing him literally use that rhetoric now. So I think a fascism alert is definitely in order, and we need to be talking about this and pointing this out. This is not a healthy thing for a democracy. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Trump stumbles too much even for Fox News. I've got to show this to you on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Right back with our our Fox News alert, and your calls after this. Stay tuned. And welcome back. MJ in Ankeny, Iowa. Hey, MJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Welcome back. I'm glad you're feeling better. It's nice to see you back in the studio.
Me too. Yeah.
I sent you an email, replied to your newsletter email today just about the catastrophe that Kim Reynolds' law here in Iowa caused problems for families and employers regarding their child labor laws. A lot of these employers have been getting kind of fined. So there's that. I'll let you dive into that on your own.
I did. I read the article this morning, and what I got out of it, MJ, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Kim Reynolds signed a law that is an open and flagrant violation of federal laws regarding child labor. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So now employers are doing what the state allows, and it's getting them in trouble with the feds. Brilliant.
Yep. Well, that's the thing I wanted to mention in relation to that is everyone on this call, everyone watching Tom, you need to go out and make sure that you're participating in your local elections. That's everything from school board on up to the president.
Yeah.
And the reason is because you've got to be involved. But the other last thing I wanted to tell you real quick, Tom, I think anybody who says, well, the baby's a person, the embryo's a person. This is the thing. I've baked a lot in my life. Now, if you don't have the right amount of flour, or you don't have the right temperature, or you don't have egg or something that's going to make that thing rise in the protein, then you're not going to have a cake.
Right.
Who ever wants to eat an uncooked cake? You don't. So think about that the baby is a fully cooked cake. Now, what goes into that are the good ingredients, the eggs, the flour. I don't know if people put yeast in their breads, for example, and you have to have the right temperature, the pan, everything.
Right.
You have to make sure that you're not doing busy things, stomping on the floor to make the cake fall.
No, an embryo is a human in process rather than a human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anybody that, says, oh, you're killing babies, no, that baby isn't formed yet.
Right. Yeah.
So we just have to keep pushing back on these people who say, personhood.
Excellent point.
And personhood also for companies. I hate the fact that our campaign financing can't be reformed to make companies like that Mellon, who paid over $75 million to Trump's campaign.
Yeah, $50 million, I think it was. But that wasn't a company.
Well,
that was the heir to Andrew Mellon's fortune.
Mellon.
Yeah.
The guy, and it was 50 just recently, but he paid 25 before that.
Oh,
so a
really?
total of 75.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why, I just think there needs to be limits and more reform and more transparency in all these campaign funds. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
guys.
thank you, MJ. I've been saying for a long time, I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one, and this personhood movement within the Republican Party to define a not just a fetus and not just a zygote, but a fertilized egg that has not yet implanted, that is still in the fallopian tubes, as a human being has just radical and dire consequences for women in particular.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
MJ,
that's the other thing, is that so many of these people make these laws without the consideration of what it's going to do down road.
well, I think many of them just don't care. I think I think you're seeing misogyny on display. MJ, thank you. Thanks for the call. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Iowa. It's 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Stay with us.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
In a world where truth is fading, lies become the new sensation. Repeat them till they're real, a twisted kind of revelation. From the days of Goebbels' whispers to the modern day charade, politicians spin their stories in this deceitful masquerade. Misinformation machine, turning lies into beliefs unseen, spreading fear and doubt like wildfire in a world caught in a scheme. They say we're in recession, but the facts, they don't align. Crime is down, yet they insist that chaos reigns all the time. Falsehoods about elections and borders wide and free, they twist and turn reality in this dark, deceptive spree.
Misinformation machine. Welcome back. So Fox News, Donald Trump has reached the point where he's too much for Fox News. Honest to God, Fox News was carrying his rant in Philadelphia over the weekend, and here's the audio of it. This is Trump ranting, and then Fox News going, "Okay, enough of crazy grandpa. We're going to move on."
Where there's so much water, you don't know what to do with it. It's called rain. It rains a lot in certain places. But no, their idea, did you see the other day? I opened it up and they closed it again. I opened it, they closed it. Washing machines to wash your dishes. There's a problem. They don't want you to have any water. They want no water. And I was with one.
And you were just listening to former President Trump, and we're going to talk about some of the things he was discussing there. We'll be right back.
Oh, yeah. Let's go to a break. Grandpa's gone nuts. So I just want to share that with you. Okay, so what's on your mind today? Laura in Port Angeles? Is it Port Angeles? Laura?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, what's your city? It says Port Angeles? I've never heard of that.
Oh, it's Port Angeles, Washington.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks. Got it. So what's up? It's Port Angeles, Washington.
So
Thank you.
I seen something on Politics Girl yesterday with Lee McGowan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's brilliant. I've been on her podcast. She's great.
I love her. And she had a guest, and I can't remember the guest's name, but I'm sure anybody that wants to know about it can find her. She's written a book, and you may have had the guest on before, too. I don't know. She's an expert in dictators, and she's gone down through history, and I'm not sure I'd know it if I heard it. Anyway, she pointed out in her article that over and over again, all down through history, as soon as the oligarchs put in a dictator, because the rich you know, like they're doing right now with Trump, giving him millions and millions of dollars for his campaign. As soon as they get him in there and the dictator doesn't need him anymore, they turn on the oligarchs.
Oh, yeah.
And greed is a bottomless pit. So they're never happy with their wealth. So they want to just take that wealth from those oligarchs.
Yeah, no, this is what happened. Fritz Thyssen was one of the richest men in Germany in 1933, and he was the guy who raised 3 million Reichsmarks to get Adolf Hitler basically to make him chancellor. He was the guy who lobbied Hindenburg and von Papen to make that happen. And he wrote a book called I Paid Hitler, which I think is out of print now, but I've got an old copy my dad gave me years ago. And in which he tells the whole story, how he brought Hitler to power thinking that Hitler would make him even richer, and then Hitler turned on him, and he had to flee the country with his entire family. He ended up in the United States.
Yeah, and right now they're just doing it again. And, you know, greed also blinds people to reality, and I'm sure they have no clue what they're doing. But, you know, I think it's worth getting out there, and maybe some of them will actually go, oh, wait a minute, am I actually working in my own best interest here?
Yeah.
You know?
I agree.
But that's my little contribution to the world today.
Well, that was a great one, Laura. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate the call. James in Hugo, Oklahoma. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Well, I got a question, Mr. Hartmann. Since they got Hunter Biden for his for gun laws, for gun crimes, wouldn't it be a good time to kind of concentrate on the gun laws right now?
Yeah, there's 12 million Americans who are gun owners who take drugs, who clearly lied the same way that Hunter Biden did on the application. There's only been 135 people prosecuted under that law, and Hunter Biden's the only one who wasn't committing a crime with a gun. So, yeah, I think, James, we should start going after those 12 million Americans who both use drugs and own guns and lied on their federal gun applications, if that's what you're arguing.
Right. Thank you.
Makes perfect sense to me, James. James, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for listening to us there in Oklahoma, or watching us on YouTube, I guess it is. It's 27 minutes past the hour. What's on your mind today? I'll be back with more of your calls here right after this. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So do you think Trump is going to be jacked up on Adderall when he does the debates? We've heard from multiple people who worked with him on Celebrity Apprentice that he was constantly snorting Adderall. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president.
These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police in the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. Back in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson was president, Earl Warren resigned from the Supreme Court. He was a liberal, even though he had been appointed by Eisenhower. Johnson wasn't able to replace him, in part because of Republican opposition in the Senate. And so when Nixon came in, he had this opening, but he wanted to have two openings. He wanted to get rid of Abe Fortas, who was the most liberal member of the court. So he had his Attorney General, John Mitchell, start an investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Now, there was nothing there. There was no smoke at all. She had done absolutely nothing wrong, and history has proven that. But they were going to drag her before a grand jury and possibly before Congress and just, drag her through the mud. And this caused Abe Fortas to resign, and that gave Nixon 2 openings, and that's how the court turned to the right. I'm suggesting that Democrats should do the same thing with Justice Thomas. I've got an op-ed about it at Hartmann Report. You can read it over there. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Joe in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you, brother?
I'm great. What's up?
I'm glad you're well. Let me hit you with just a couple of things that I think are really important, especially with the upcoming debate. Republicans have been beating the Democrats over the head with the issue of inflation in every debate. In 2022, I watched probably about 15 debates where Democrats were just helpless. And the DNC needs a fact-based standard retort to those claims. For example, Sweden. Sweden.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say Sweden, Canada, Mexico, UK, Israel, Germany, dozens of other countries have had higher inflation than America. So it is global unless Joe Biden is running those countries.
Right. Well, you know what the inflation rate was last month, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's right around the 3 mark.
No,
and
it was 0.
Their target is.
It was 0. The inflation rate month to month was 0 last month. And it got no publicity at all. I mean, it was 0. The annual inflation rate is a little over 3%, but the month-to-month rate last month was 0, which tells me that we're sliding into a recession or in danger of it. But
I agree with you. I did not know that we had it down to 0.
Yeah.
But the truth is, since 2021, our rate of cost of living has gone up about 25%. So if you have a 0 month, that's worth yelling about. But if you're still suffering from 25% inflation and maybe a 10% raise on the job, you're still hurting 15%.
Sure.
That has to be acknowledged, but it's global.
Yep.
That's the problem. It's not just that it's gone down to 0, which I think you're right when you're saying that's somewhat alarming, but and maybe it's because of supply chains and Joe Biden's fighting back on the oil market manipulation and stuff. I'm sure that plays into it. Even the greedy corporations might be going, we went too far. So either way, he has to have a response other than, look, it's 0 now, because people are still feeling it.
And the world saw this once before, after the great flu pandemic of 1918. That pretty much faded out by 1922. It took 4 years actually for that flu virus to mutate to the point where it was no longer a pathogen, no longer killing large numbers of people. And the consequence of that we refer to as the Roaring '20s. I mean, the Roaring '20s were a time of wild inflation worldwide. Again, because of the flu pandemic, it was, people had been, hiding, and there weren't lockdowns, but there were mask mandates in the 1918 to 1920 era. In fact, there was a big battle. I believe it went to the Supreme Court about them here in Oregon. It might have just gone to the state Supreme Court. There were.
But Tom,
go ahead, Joe.
The bottom line is it's not Joe Biden's fault.
Right.
As to the fact that people are still kind of hurting them. Let me move on to 2 more quickies. As for the youth vote, let's remind them that Trump is a climate denier, withdrew America from the All Nations Paris Climate Agreement.
Yep.
And Gaza is bad, but not having a planet to live on is much worse. I think that's important. Now, I've got to hit you with this little joke that I had, which is I heard in Texas they're wanting to put some things up on the school walls.
Yes, I'm listening.
Bucket list they're wanting to post.
Go ahead.
Is that the Trump bucket list they're wanting to post in Texas schools?
Oh, is that the Trump bucket list? I get it. Okay. Good joke, Joe.
I mean, there's only a couple of them he hasn't done.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the Ten Commandment reference, but it's a Trump bucket list, basically.
Yeah. I think that.
Let's vote for him.
That's marvelous. Okay,
Anyway.
Joe. Yeah, good one. Thank you very much, Joe. Good to hear from you. Sonny in Kyle, Texas. Hey, Sonny, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah. Hey, a couple of things. You know, I'm optimistic. You know, I think, like you said, we're on the verge of. It's like a 1980s moment. You know, we're gonna go do the right thing or go backwards. You know, I think this time we're gonna do the right thing. I'm
so
hopeful.
too. I am
and it's
too.
gonna be an American Renaissance like no one's ever seen before. Anyway.
I think you're right.
You know, let's. What if the worst thing happens, and you know Trump wins? You know, because of cheating, right? That's the only way they can do it. What's to keep Biden from, you know, stopping from calling on, you know, martial law, or getting, you know, maybe Merrick Garland will grow a pair and arrest, you know, Trump and all his cronies, all the fake electors and all the unindicted conspirators, you know, put them in jail.
Yeah.
You know.
One can hope.
And I mean, you know, what.
I think after Trump loses the election, there's going to be a real reckoning. I think next year is going to be a terrible year for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and you know, Biden can hide behind the Supreme Court like Trump does. Yeah. You know, hey, he's got immunity. You know.
Yeah. Well, if the Supreme Court gives Trump immunity, that means Biden has immunity. He can do what he wants with Trump right now.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you. I called about a month ago, and I asked you if you had seen the YouTube video of Trump getting startled by that Mexican music. I wonder if you ever saw that.
I didn't. No, I'm sorry.
Oh man, you got to look it up. It's you know, it's short. Mm-hmm. He's startled by Mexican music in when he was running in the 2016. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice if they played Mexican music at the beginning of the debate, man, just to watch.
Little mariachi music. Yeah, I get it. Okay, Sonny.
You got to check it out, man.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom. Good talking to you.
Thanks. Good talking to you too, Sonny. Thank you. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've noticed a kind of an odd coincidence that all over the world, suddenly, all of these different countries who speak different languages and have different customs are all suddenly going far right, and it seems very, very convenient. And I'm just wondering, is everyone in the world suddenly mind-numbed and blank on the history of the world? Or is it possible that we need a possible use of Finland's options of teaching from kindergarten on up how to spot a fake, how to spot a con, or
Finland was one of the only countries that
did. To the people with the most money.
Yeah, Finland was one of the only 3 countries that didn't send right-wingers to the European Parliament. But I think that there's 2 things going on, Sandra. One is that when Russia supported Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, back in, 2012, I think. I'd have to go back and look, but something like a little more than a decade ago. Assad, what had happened was the Arab Spring was the result of the desert moving south in northern Africa, and it jacked up wheat prices, and the guy in Tunisia lit himself on fire and all that kind of thing. Well, what had happened in Syria was that the thousands, maybe certainly tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of small subsistence farmers in northern Syria lost their farms because the desert moved south and basically turned their farmland into desert. And so they ended up in Aleppo and Damascus, the 2 major cities of Syria, broke and homeless. And we're talking like over 1 million people. and in these two cities, and they were just, demanding that the government give them food and a place to live. And Assad's response to that was to send the police into the streets and just literally mow them down. He killed thousands of people trying to stop the protests and the demonstrations. That then led to a civil war, and Putin intervened and just bombed. I mean, he bombed Aleppo back to the Stone Age, and he bombed about a third of Damascus out of existence. And that produced 6 million refugees. That was going on at the same time that Libya was melting down. Because we had the Obama administration had killed Gaddafi, and Libya became a mess, and so you had somewhere between 5 and 10 million dark-skinned Muslim refugees who left North Africa and fled into Europe, and Germany took in over 1 million of them. Sweden took in like 400,000 or 500,000 of them. Something like 1 million of them ended up in Italy, and many of them are still there. They ended up in Greece. They ended up in all these countries. And what you're seeing right now is the racist backlash to these traditionally white European countries having been, quote, invaded. It's the same kind of rhetoric. The politicians on the right in Europe are using the exact same rhetoric that Donald Trump and the Republicans are using here. The invasion, the dark people, they're not like us. And that is the number one thing that is driving the move to the right in Europe. That's also Modi's using that now in India. He's going after the Pakistani, the Muslim minority in India, and trying to make Hinduism the official religion of India. And he's basically pitting, one part of his country against another. But it works to the political advantage of right-wing politicians. And then on top of that, the second factor that's happening in Europe, but it's not anywhere near as big as in the United States, is that the right-wing billionaires feel empowered, and they are supporting these right-wing candidates. So, it's a perfect storm.
I got a quick joke for you.
Okay, go for it.
I got it. Do you know the difference between a World War II German Nazi and current far-right Republicans?
No.
The German speaks German.
Yeah, there you go. Good one. Sandra, thank you very much for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back with more of your calls. What's on your mind today? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truth, the right-wingers really would rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. And let's see here, who's been on hold the longest? Tony in Long Island, New York. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Jim, Tom, I was giving a call about that Israel-Gaza situation.
Yeah.
I talked to you a long time ago about this, and you actually agree with me, but I guess you didn't term it that way. But there's no way that he speaks for all Israelis, because this is a left-wing, right-wing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Hamas is a right-wing organization, and the government in Israel is a right-wing organization, and they're butting heads.
Yep.
And especially the government from Israel is trying to drive a wedge here in the United States between the lefties.
Yep.
Using this, and I wish the kids would realize that the right wing is the problem here.
I agree. And there's a strong left-wing opposition in Israel. Haaretz, the progressive newspaper, has broad circulation. There are a lot of progressives in Israel. Israel historically had progressive governments up until the last 15, 20 years or so. And, and then Netanyahu took the country to the right in his coalitions with the hard right religious groups. Yeah, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, left-right actually supersedes country.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because if you're from the same country and you're a right-winger, you want to kill the left-winger, even if he's your countryman.
Yeah, sadly. I'm not sure I'd use the word kill, but yes, you're absolutely right. Tony, thank you. Alex in San Pedro, California. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. Number one, I just want to say really quickly, thank you for going through the COVID thing and surviving. I've been really worried about that with you, and somebody said a while back, if I don't get the news from you, it's that something's wrong with the day, and I guess it's become that with me. but I'm glad you're getting better. I'm just going to close on that one really quickly. Tag, don't be it. Don't get COVID again, Tom, please. I keep on wearing my mask, and
I'll do my best, Alex.
I guess I got that from you.
Yeah.
Don't be it. Just don't get it again because, the long-term stuff.
Yeah.
Now, back to the topic. I bake cakes myself once in a while. And so, like the other lady was saying a few callers back, if pregnancy is like a cake, and if someone, like people sometimes punch women on purpose when they're pregnant to make them force an abortion, well, the baby's still in the cake. So no matter how the yeast and the cake is rising and it starts to collapse and it collapses, it's a collapsed cake, and that means the water is broken. And if that's the case and she's bleeding or whatever, why are we putting people in prison for cakes that are failed? In other words, babies that are pretty much already dead anyway. That's not Christian.
Yeah.
Or that's not law, period. It doesn't matter Christianity or not, but that's not law.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Why are we dealing... yeah. And...
go ahead, Alex.
I guess my dyslexia is kind of catching up to me. I go back and forth and I stutter in my thinking sometimes.
No, I get it. But your point is that specifically what?
Say again, please.
What is the point you're trying to make in a sentence?
Okay, I'm trying. Yeah, this is a kind of a difficult one. Here we go again. So, you mix the ingredients, you put the cake in the oven, the cake is starting to rise, and then like she was saying, if a big noise happens, it collapses.
Yeah.
So if a woman is pregnant, she wants to have her kid.
No, I got that. You're just repeating what you said. So your bottom line here is that a fetus is not a human. Is that the point you're trying to make?
Not only that, but I mean, am I going to get fired for being a baker because the cake collapsed?
Yeah, no, I get it. Thank you, Alex. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's, 51 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it.
Turn off that channel, it's filling you with lies, spreading fear and anger beneath those polished ties. They twist the truth and bend the facts, it's all a grand disguise. Don't let them rot your mind away, don't buy their alibis. Don't listen to Fox, so-called news. It's misleading, it's wrong, it's designed to confuse. It will watch your brain and make you mean. Turn off the noise and say the truth unseen. They profit from division and from the seeds of hate. They turn our friends to enemies and twist the public fate. They shout with indignation while hiding what is true. Don't let them take your kindness, don't let them poison you. Don't listen to Fox, so-called news. It's misleading, it's wrong, it's designed to confuse. It will rot your brain and make you mean. Turn off the noise and say the truth unseen. Seek out the voices of reason. Look beyond the screen. The world is more than black and white. There's so much in between. Don't let them dull your senses or blind you with their might. Find the truth and empathy and step into the light.
Yeah, don't listen to Fox, so-called news. I love it. Mayor in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Mayor, what's on your mind today? Mayor, you are on the air.
Hey there, Tom. I just wanted to ask you what you thought about the possibility that if the Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, what do you think the chances are with this Supreme Court that they could consider some constitutional amendments? You were talking earlier about, which blows my mind, that it wasn't until the 70s that women could sign for their own credit cards.
Yep.
And that is just unbelievable to me. I was born in 1967, so
I remember when it happened in 1973. Louise and I had been married 2 years, and finally she could get a credit card on her own.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Yeah.
Just in the 70s. And I remember my first credit card, my dad had to sign for it, even though it was past 1972.
Oh.
I mean, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
But a constitutional amendment to put in place some safeguards for anyone who runs for office who is against government, you were talking about this earlier. If you're against government, you should not be allowed to run to be a leadership in government. I mean, this to me is a huge conflict of interest with most of the people in the right wing.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we stop this from happening again?
Well, I think we just need to educate people. I don't think that you can, it would be a violation of the First Amendment, and it just wouldn't be right to stop people from running for office just because they think that government is too big or they don't like the way government is run. I think, a healthy debate is a good thing. Part of the problem is that our media is so concentrated that we hear very few voices. And you've got this massive right-wing echo chamber, apropos of the last song, don't listen to Fox. But the constitutional amendment that I would love to see is one that says that there's an absolute right to vote. Right now, they can take your vote away. In Georgia, they can't take your gun away without going to court, but they can take your vote away without even telling you. And that tells us everything that's wrong with this country right now. And that could be fixed with a single constitutional amendment. And, or for that matter, I believe it could be fixed with a law. I think Congress can make a law that says that, there is an absolute right to vote, period, full stop. And if somebody's vote is going to be taken away from them by some, right-winger in some state, there has to be a judicial process. So that's my suggestion. Plus the Equal Rights Amendment. I'd love to see the ERA passed. Mary, I gotta move on, but thank you for the call. I'm sorry, your phone is just going nuts there. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing? In terms of you're playing songs now, a good one would be Woody Guthrie's "Ain't Got No Home," which is about old man Trump.
Yeah, the problem is it's copyrighted. We can't play copyrighted music on the show, so we're
really?
Yeah, so
he died in 1967. You can see YouTube ones.
It's still
anyway.
But I get it. Yeah, YouTube violates copyrights all the time, but we can't.
Right.
So we're making our own music.
Sure. One of the lines in Beach Haven, which is the Trump projects he lived in Queens. Beach Haven is Trump's tower, where no black folks come to roam. No, old man Trump. Old Beach Haven ain't my home.
Oh, yeah. And Woody Guthrie wrote a song about old man Trump, about Fred Trump.
That's
Donald's
what I'm
father.
talking about.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was a good song.
He mentions a tower. He died in 67. But the other thing I was going to say is about the United States. It could be tough to have authoritarianism because we don't have a history of kings or tyrants like Europe does. Yeah. Which is why it's taking a little longer here. That's the only thing holding us back.
I think you're right, Bill. Although sadly, you've got an entire right wing that wants one. They want King Trump right now. Bill, thanks for the call. We'll be back on the other side of the break here. Trump, the GOP presses the Supreme Court.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. Congressman William Timmons, the Republican from South Carolina, is sponsoring legislation right now. It's a resolution. It doesn't have the force of law because it involves the Supreme Court. And while Congress can tell the Supreme Court what to do, it's clearly laid out in Article 3, Section 2. That Congress shall regulate and provide exceptions to what the Supreme Court can do and rule on. Nonetheless, this is advisory, and basically it's a resolution that probably all the Republicans are going to vote for this week. In fact, expect to hear more about it, asking the Supreme Court to overturn Trump's conviction in New York by Alvin Bragg, in Judge Juan Merchan's courtroom. And because they're just really ripped up about their orange god is now a convicted felon with 34 felony convictions on his record, and he's out on parole right now. I mean, he hasn't even been sentenced yet. That's in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. July 7th, I think, is the date that they've scheduled for the sentencing. Maybe July 11th. Sorry, I'm not exactly certain. You can look it up. But he's sponsoring this resolution, and he says this would allow the president. Oh, he's also sponsoring a piece of legislation that would allow the president to move any case out of state court into federal court. And it's too late for that for Trump. But this could provide an end run around Fani Willis's prosecution of Trump and the other phony electors down in Georgia, which has been put on indefinite hold, again in this case by Scott McAfee and by the Republican Judiciary Commission, I believe it is, in the state of Georgia, as they investigate Fani Willis and her investigation of Trump. Timmons' 7-page resolution argues that procedural elements of the Trump case raise constitutional questions that warrant such intervention, along with, quote, its unprecedented nature and overwhelming public interest. And again, yes, it's unprecedented. And there is an overwhelming amount of interest in it. But, hey, Trump, if you don't want to go to prison, don't commit crimes. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff. The court should act with all, he writes, the court should act with all deliberate speed and possible urgency so voters can make informed decisions about the upcoming presidential election. Right. Trump, Johnson, and Representative Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, who's a potential vice presidential candidate, have all called for the Supreme Court to intervene. Do you think the Supreme Court's going to intervene? I am skeptical, shall we say, even in the face of a resolution. I think they would love to. I mean, they've already intervened in the case down in Florida by giving Trump almost a 1-year delay. It was in December of last year. What is that? It's a 7-month delay now, 8-month delay. It was in December of last year that Jack Smith asked the Supreme Court to pick up this case and rule on it within a month. And they said, no, we'll take our time. We're going to hear arguments in April. at the very last day of our term. And then we'll give you the decision maybe in June, maybe in July, maybe in September, August, October, November. I don't know when we're going to get around to it. Because, see, I'm convinced that Sam Alito's the guy who's holding this up. Could be Thomas, too. But John Roberts is going to try and get every single one of the justices on board to vote yes or no and write an opinion. And all Thomas and Alito have to do to give Trump what he wants, which is delay, so that this trial will not happen before the election. And that's going to be a real tough decision for Judge Chutkan. But all they need to do is just delay it to the point where, she can't hold the trial. She has said that the trial will take 3 months. So if you work back from, the 1st of November, that means October, September, and August, right? So if the Supreme Court waits until the last week of July or the first week of August, which is entirely possible, they can do that. There is nothing that requires them to release a decision now. If they wait until then there's literally no way that the trial can happen before the election or can have completed itself before the election. And frankly, I think that they're pretty much to that point right now. I mean, basically, nothing would begin until, even if they handed down the decision this week. Keep in mind, the debate is on Thursday. And it's possible that a decision comes down Thursday, which could really scramble the debate. Thursday and Friday are the days that they've been releasing their decisions. But, Trump has already won in this case. It sure looks like to me, anyway. I mean, I'll be astonished if Judge Chutkan can move this thing up and make it happen faster. And then, of course, all they have to do once she starts the trial again is just come up with some other BS appeal to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will say, yeah, sure, we'll listen to that. And boom, we're in the middle of next year. I mean, this is exactly what's going on down in Florida, where Judge Luce Cannon is doing everything she can to give Trump all the delays he wants. Hearing all these absurd motions. Hunter Biden, his lawyer tried that trick, saying, the special counsel is not legitimate. And the court said, what are you, kidding? But Aileen Cannon, it's a tough one. Meanwhile, the federal government has for years been providing states with money for election security. This started in 2006 with the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, which defined, came up with this new category of voter, the provisional ballot voter, which is a voter who thinks they cast a ballot, but it never gets counted in most cases. But the Help America and the Help America Vote Act also designated $5 billion for the states to buy voting machines from companies that basically helped write the Help America Vote Act. And but nonetheless, what Congress has done under HAVA over the years is pretty much every year they appropriate between $50 and $75 million to the states for election security. And this year is, the states are going to need a lot of election security money. Now, this is not necessarily money that just goes to pay for voting machines. This is money that goes to pay for security for polling places, that goes to pay for informing people of where to vote and when to vote and how to vote, to updating the security patches on the machines. I mean, just basically taking care of everything. But the big concern is this army of 100,000 people that the Trump Republican Party is trying to raise. They want Proud Boys armed with AR-15s in front of every polling place in America, checking ID and harassing people. And the Supreme Court has said that's okay. And this is how William Rehnquist made his chops back in the 60s in Arizona with Operation Eagle Eye. They're basically reinventing Operation Eagle Eye and bringing it back. And so this money for election security could basically foil their plans, could make it difficult for them to intimidate, for the Republicans to intimidate voters. So, in response to that, the Republican-controlled House Appropriations Committee just passed this year's money for election security grants under HAVA, the HAVA grants. And guess what the amount is? Last year was $50 million. The year before that was $75 million. Guess what the amount was this year? Zero. Republicans in the House, $0. They approved $55 million in this spring, but the final funding was a decrease from $75 million down to $55. And then some states are just impounding the money. They're not even spending it. Louisiana, for example, hasn't spent any of their election security grant funding since 2018. New Hampshire passed a state law that puts it into an endowment. It's generating interest for the state, but it does nothing. Now, why are Republicans so opposed to the states getting money for election security? Because they don't believe in elections. They can't wait until Donald Trump comes in, declares a national insurrection, and under the Insurrection Act, ends democracy in the United States. He's told us he's going to do it. It's not a secret. So how are we going to deal with this? I don't know. This is going to be a wild year. The next 12 months are going to be like something we've never seen in American history. And it really kicks off this Thursday. This is the beginning of the election season. Normally it kicks off, first week of September when summer vacation is over. But here we are in June, kicking this thing off. Stay tuned. What's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back. David in Nipomo, California. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. Well, listen, the reason I called is a couple of days back, you had a report on the FBI crime statistics, and I was really impressed because so many people are believing these Republican lies, and I was wondering where you got that information. I'd love to get a hold of that so I can actually have some walking around with and say, hey, look, you're listening to lies. Here's the facts. Where do you get that?
Go to any, it was a newspaper article at the time, but you can just go to any search engine and just type in crime is down FBI crime statistics, and you'll get all kinds of articles about it. It was all over the place. It's widely reported. It's no secret.
Just crime is down FBI statistics.
Yep. Just plug that into Google or DuckDuckGo or Perplexity or whatever, and you'll get it. All right?
The things I wanted to bring up real quickly, Citizens United, I know about it. I'm amazed and blown away by how many educated people I've talked to that have no inkling about it.
Right.
Just blows my mind. And the other thing is, you keep bringing up, what's his name was the deciding vote. I think there's still 2 or 3 others on the Supreme Court that were part of that 5 that voted it in.
Yeah, Roberts was.
Yeah, and I think wasn't Alito too?
Alito was on the court at that time.
Yeah. Anyway, it might be worthwhile mentioning their names too when you talk about it.
Yeah, it's just that Clarence Thomas is the one who's the clearly most corrupt and thus I think most vulnerable to public pressure. Although Alito has given him a run for his money. David, thank you. Thanks for the call. Good one. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind today? Today, I want to have a little conversation about externality, or let's call it something we all can understand, the loss of freedom without consent. It's basically anything caused by an activity of one group, and it has a negative impact on another group with no consent of that third party. And usually, like say, secondhand smoke is an example of social cost. At the whim of a person who smokes by choice, other people who don't choose to smoke are harmed, so they've lost their freedom.
Correct.
And traditionally, governments intervene and they provide price and they curb these externalities with regulations. That's not happening now. So let's look at voting laws enacted to keep voters from voting, bodily autonomy of women restricted for the benefit of so-called religious supremacists. At the whim of a Second Amendment advocate, hundreds of lives can be stolen, losing the freedom to live. I'm suggesting that we start talking about the freedoms that we are losing at basically the whim of others who make laws that cause these externalities with which we have no control of the outcome. I think a law to address and amend laws that remove freedoms of citizens without consent.
Yeah. I like that, Lori. I'd never thought of, preventing people from voting by purging them from voting rolls as an externality, but I think you're onto something. Lori, brilliant. Thank you. Appreciate the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be right back with you. Stay tuned.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
In a world that's often harsh, and the nights can feel so long, there's a call within our hearts to make the weak feel strong. For the children, for the elders, for the ones who need a hand, let's stand together side by side and help them understand. We are their voice, we are their light, we'll lift them up through darkest night.
Welcome back. Picking up your calls here, 22 minutes past the hour. Tommy in Greenfield, Indiana. Hey, Tommy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you real quick if you're willing to have a conversation with someone that has more conservative views.
I love having conversations with people who have conservative views, Tommy. What's on your mind?
I'll give you 3 quick topics, what I think, and then I'll hear what you have to say about that. First,
why don't you pick
the border.
one?
All right, the border.
Okay, what about it?
You just alluded to Donald Trump's conviction on 34 counts of whatever. I would submit to you, Joe Biden and his crew have allowed 10 plus million people to cross the border illegally. However you want to spin it is fine, but they are in this country illegally. They have killed, they have raped little girls and women, not to mention whatever else crimes that have been committed, driving tractor-trailer trucks, having accidents and killing people on the highways. If I was Joe Biden, I would be begging the Supreme Court to please give Donald Trump immunity in his documents case, because if I can be tried for allowing 10 plus million people into this country, The criminal code states anyone that helps a person enter the country illegally has a sentence of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's guilty of a crime. So Tommy, let's just look at this. It's a great topic. I'm sure you realize that in 1986, when Ronald Reagan legalized 5 million people in the United States and kind of reset the clock to zero, actually I think 11 million is probably a more accurate number of people who are in this country illegally. That started in 1987, number one. That number two, that before 1986, it was a crime to hire people who are in this country illegally. And Reagan changed that and stopped enforcing that law at the request of the meatpacking industry. And so for the last 40 years since Reagan made that change, you have big companies in the United States, particularly in the meatpacking industry, who literally advertise in Spanish language newspapers down south in Guatemala and Ecuador, in Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, that they're looking for help. If you can make it up here, we'll hire you. So number one, that's something, and every time Democrats try to criminalize employers hiring people who are in this country illegally, Republicans block it, number one. Number two, I'm guessing that you know that the crime rate in immigrant communities, where there are large numbers of people who are in this country illegally, is 32% lower than the crime rate in all white communities. And the reason for that is obvious. People don't want to be caught. You know, they don't want to come to the attention of the police because they're not in this country legally. In fact, the cities with the highest levels of illegal immigrants, to use your phrase, undocumented people, the cities with the highest levels of undocumented people have the lowest crime rates in the United States, and the 12 large border communities in the United States where there are large numbers of undocumented immigrants, from California all the way through Texas, the 12 largest have the lowest crime rates in the United States. Number three, I'm guessing that you realize that some, $30-40 billion a year is added to Social Security and Medicare by people who don't even qualify for it on the back end, these illegal immigrants that you're talking about. And number four, illegal crossings at the southern border right now are lower than they've been at any time other than when COVID was happening. They're certainly lower than they were during the first 3 years of the Trump administration. So, Tommy, I'm sorry, I'm out of time now. And this is a hard break. I can't control it. But call again, and we'll continue the conversation. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And finally, I would point out that Democrats and Republicans got together to do something about the southern border. Jim Lankford actually wrote the legislation, and Republicans in the House blew up that bill because Donald Trump told them to.
Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink, by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph, Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a 6-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country. More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, the Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmanreport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Radio Waves, 36 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, besides the deep state billionaires who are so mighty Christian, you know, and these self-professed Christians that, you know, with this border and stuff, I keep reminded of this thing I wrote about put on the full armor of Koresh, that you may be able to resist the evil woke federal government and having incited insurrection on behest of your betters to hold your ground. So stand fast with your loins girded in the truth of designer tidy whities, clothed with the best of Kevlar, your feet shod with the steel-toed boots for kicking Democrats and liberals to spread the demagoguery of peace in our time. In all circumstances, hold women and children as human shields against snipers and deflect the tear gas flashbangs of the ATF and FBI. And put on the motorcycle helm of self-righteous salvation, the gas mask that protects your God-given life's breath, and the AR-15 of spirit, which is the word of God. For good, bad, I'm the guy with the gun. Surrender or die.
I get it. Okay, a good one, David.
So anyway, I've never gotten an apology from Israel about the USS Liberty.
Yeah, none of us did.
And
most people don't even know about it.
The whole thing with AIPAC, how we let a foreign country run our elections, which, you know, we're up to the ears here. Yeah. I have a question I always want submitted.
Well, just for the record, by the way, AIPAC is an American political action committee, and it is largely funded by American right-wing billionaires.
Exactly.
But it, you know, it is the American Israel political action committee. So.
Oh, they're just taking full advantage of the mention of Israel in the Bible, and especially in the books of the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
You know, but you've got this you're talking about an activist judiciary. Lord. You know, we're trying to ban UBI here in Oklahoma. Of course, we don't want federal funds for feeding kids during school. The Cherokee Nation, Osage Nation stepped up and are funding the children's school thing right now. And, of course, we won't fund the extension of Medicare. I've had a friend, she's dead now, who did the DHS here in Oklahoma. She had clients that were living in cardboard boxes that could not get Sooner Care.
Wow.
So mighty Christian. And here they want to put the 10 Commandments on the courthouse lawn. And I want to say something about that everybody keeps missing. They're doing this at taxpayer expense.
Yeah.
When Scott Pruitt was suing the Colorado EPA and everybody else from trying to put the courthouse lawn and stuff here from Oklahoma, thankfully he got swept up. Unfortunately, it went to Trump. But, that was all on the taxpayer dime. Yep. Meanwhile, they're doing tax cuts and budget cuts.
Yep. No, I get it, David. I get it. David, good one. Thank you very much. Great rant.
Thank you.
Okay, good talking to you. Jim in Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard you mention it. Agenda 21 and 25. Are you familiar with those two?
Refresh my memory.
Well, Clinton started it with the word sustainability. So anytime you hear that word, you have to know that it is Agenda 25 now because they're behind. But basically, in 2015, on the internet, there was an article that I just consumed for 3 days, and it was called Brown's Gas. And then it disappeared, and so did he. And even CSX trains advertised that they could get 400 miles per gallon of fuel. And I knew immediately that they were using Brown's gas. It is hydrogen on an atomic level, not molecular, which is, can be disastrous. On an atomic level, mixed with water, it can burn a flame equal to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can run it across your arm and it won't burn you. It's very, very unique. And they're building on
this is weird stuff, Jim, and the whole Agenda 25, 21 thing. These were simply resolutions that came out of COP meetings, out of the climate meetings, and I believe they came out of the one down in South America. Yeah, that's all they are. They have no force of law. They're simply resolutions saying we think this would be a good idea. Jim, I think you're going down some really bizarre kind of QAnon rabbit holes here. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to give you credit for getting momentum started. I've noticed over the last 72 hours, a lot more people are talking about Project 2025. What I wanted to suggest, and I was actually trying to suggest this to Mark Pocan last week, but I couldn't get through, that the Democrats have an adverse messaging strategy called 34 and 24, and it would talk about 34 different things that we could either sustain, protect, or enact if we had a landslide, Democratic landslide on the November election. So talking about ensuring that we have voting rights, ensuring that we have health care, ensuring that we have education. But I've been using this technique to talk to the other Trump humpers about what they think is important. You let them know that most of those type of things may be removed in Project 25 and provide an alternative that if we had a blue wave, these are the type of things that we could get done. And going with your bumper sticker slogan, that's why I went with 34 and 24. And I don't think anybody will remember all 34 items, but it allows us to give us some context and talk about it.
That's the problem. I mean, conventional wisdom among political consultants is pick 3 issues and hammer them, relentlessly for at least a month. It takes people that long. Most people don't even realize they've heard something until after the 7th time they've heard it. And and just because something's in the media over and over doesn't mean that the average person is getting it. But I get what you're saying. Bundled, I think 34 and 24 is nice. I would prefer something like the New Deal or the Great Society. I mean, some broad vision that's got a name attached to it. I think that kind of branding works better. Bill Clinton tried it with the New Covenant. That was his speech in 1992. He said he was running on a new covenant. But then when he became president, he just embraced neoliberalism. He went, full Reagan on us, sadly. Which is why his wife now is not endorsing Jamal Bowman, sadly. But, I get it, Jordan. And I think it's, messaging is a good idea. Thank you very much for that. Karen in New Orleans. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm so glad you're well.
Thank you. Me too.
Last time I talked to you was Mardi Gras. New Orleans was the happiest city in the world. Now it's the saddest, I think, because of this right-wing, radical, religious governor that we have. He's trying to take over New Orleans, and he's going to ruin the tourist and music and movie trade. And that's our best revenue. The reason I'm calling, 90% of rape is done by men. 100% of pregnancy is done by men. Men can get Viagra in the mail without a prescription. And first there is a sperm, and then an egg, and then a zygote, and then an embryo, and then a fetus, and then a baby. And these Christians that never read the first few pages of the Bible, God made man out of the dust of the earth and breathed life into him.
Right, this is where the word
inspiration comes from. The bottom line is that men, a baby is a squirt, and a woman, a baby is a life sentence.
Yeah, Yeah, good point, Saul.
And these incels are nothing but spoiled and lazy. They don't have to develop a personality. They don't have to learn how to flirt. They don't have to ask for a date or go on a date. It's, I've got a stick and you've got a hole, and if you don't let me use your hole, then you're evil.
Yeah, no, I get it. We have a real problem with incels in the United States right now, and they're coalescing with the Republican
It's what
Party.
you were talking about earlier, paternalism.
Yeah, patriarchy. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Spot on. It's 45 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we're still here. Be right back with your calls. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Clay in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Hey, Clay, what's on your mind today?
Well, regarding Trump's mental state, I don't really think, I don't see that he is mentally declining to any great extent. What I see is that he's being more unrestrained in being his natural self.
I agree with you, Clay. I am constantly getting these emails and reading these stories about how Trump has dementia and all this kind of stuff. I think it's fairly clear that he has, age-related memory decline. He mixed up Hillary Clinton and some other woman, Nikki Haley, I guess it was. He mixed up Barack Obama and Joe Biden. But that kind of stuff happens to anybody who's 78 years old. I think you're right. I think we're just seeing and I think he's desperate. He's looking at the possibility of going to prison if he doesn't become president, and therefore he will do or say anything.
Yeah, he thinks that this is what his followers want to hear now, is just his full out true colors. So that's what he's doing.
Yeah,
that's what I see.
I agree with you, Clay. I absolutely agree. Thanks a lot for the call. Well said. MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I am calling about Woody Guthrie. You can use Woody Guthrie's music anytime you want because he, with his copyright designation, he's turned it over to the people. I had to do the research because I was going to use, I wanted to use Woody Guthrie's music in a production of Grapes of Wrath. And so I did the research, and it was like a real aha, sweet moment to find out somebody who was so inclined towards the people left his music to all of us.
Wow. So, well, that's fascinating. That's good to hear, MJ.
Yeah, I did that research and saw it, and I was in touch with his relatives, his kids.
His estate.
So, yeah. And he's got a place set up so that you can contact. A daughter, I think, is a person that's in charge of it.
We'll have to see with if we can put his old man Trump song to music and do our own version of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thanks for everything you do. We were born the same month, and I'm having a flu right now, and I just have to tell you, we have to stop doing these things at the same time.
Well, I hope you feel better soon, MJ. Thanks a lot for the call. Good talking to you. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey,
talk about Jamal Bowman?
Congrats on being COVID-free, Tom. And I do want to comment on Jamal Bowman's race, but I want to say, my biggest concern for an October surprise is a wider conflict in the Middle East. And,
I agree.
And President Biden should respond to those accusations that Netanyahu made against him by actually cutting off all the offensive weapons and demanding Netanyahu come up with a post-war plan.
Instead, he rolled over. He said, no, we're going to send you those weapons now.
Right.
It's pathetic.
The wrong response.
I agree.
So, having said that, the Jamal Bowman race, Tom, it's a little different than the primary we had here because it's an open seat. And Jamal's a popular incumbent, so it's especially egregious for AIPAC to be dropping all that money on against him. And Bernie Sanders himself, who's Jewish, is supporting Jamal and calling this one of the most important primaries in history. So let's get out the vote in New York City and put Jamal back in office.
There you go. Yep, I'm with you. Jeff, well said. Thank you so much. It's 49 minutes past the hour.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
In the heart of our hometown, where the streets are bustling around, we gather beneath the morning sun. Together we can get things done. Every voice, every hand, together we can make a stand. Tag your in, let's join the fight for our future, for what's right. Raise your voice, make it known. In this land we're not alone. Tag your in, come take a stand. Every vote, every hand, together strong we'll make it through. Democracy depends on you.
Yeah, tag you're it. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Jeff in Cambridge, Minnesota. Hey, Jeff, thanks for listening to KTNF. What's up?
Yeah, I just thought I'd relay some stuff that happened to me the other day. So I have an acquaintance from high school. I'm 67 years old, so a while back, and I've always thought of him as being a Reagan Republican. Mm-hmm. And we had a little bit of exchange on Facebook, and I call the current Republican Party the repugnantkins because everything they want to do is repugnant. And he chastised me for name calling and stuff. And I said, no, it's just a descriptor. And we go back and forth a little bit. And he says, well, it's Biden's fault, all of the inflation and all of this. And I was going to write a big response. And I wrote a short one. And I said, I thought you were Reagan Republican, but I can see you probably wholeheartedly believe in Project 2025. And I said, I'm not angry, mad. I'm just sad, profoundly sad. Yeah. This guy is a college-educated guy. He was working in a company that was helping permit solar energy farms. Yeah. I mean, this guy knows better.
Yeah. Racism distorts people's worldview. And racism is the principal pitch that Donald Trump is making to his base. I get it that there are maybe some people who are concerned about tax cuts. They're mostly people who make more than $1 million a year, probably more than a couple $1 million a year in order to qualify for.
This guy was primarily a anti-abortion voter, but
okay. That's the third issue. That's the other one.
Yeah.
I get it. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Jeff. Yeah. Thanks for sharing the story with us, and good luck with your friend.
Sure.
Juanita in New Lexington, Ohio. Hey, Juanita, what's on your mind today?
Okay, thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
Just want to bounce off that one. A few calls back, that woman was talking about the 70s and stuff, and I was like, any woman in the 70s had to know that they couldn't get credit. I mean, I had 2 kids and wanted to get a tubal ligation, and I had to have him sign papers so I could do it.
Your husband?
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
That was what, pre-72?
It was 79.
Huh. Okay.
Amazing. 79. My doctor said, well, you're not old enough to know whether or not you want any more kids.
Really? How old were you?
21, and I had 2 kids.
Wow. Okay, I get it.
That's what the Republicans want to shove us back.
Yeah, it's the patriarchy. It's this father knows best.
Yes, and my husband, my ex-husband, he was like, you need to be at home and fix something to eat and clean my house and lay out my clothes and stuff. So I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
But another thing I want to ask you is, am I the only person that when the Democrats voted for Mike Johnson, to keep his speakership. I towed everything in my front room to the TV.
Yeah. Well, you know, that was a deal that they made with Mike Johnson. Johnson would not have allowed the aid to Ukraine to go through. And as it was, he delayed it for over 6 months, which led to thousands and thousands of Ukrainian deaths.
I know.
And it was just so immoral, so criminally immoral. And the deal was, we'll defend you if you'll put this legislation on the floor. And it was the only way to get the aid to Ukraine. So I support the Democrats who did it. I just think it was a terrible price to pay. I'm with you, Juanita. Juanita, thank you for the call. Mary in Mill Creek, Washington. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to know if you are able to bring somebody on from Teamsters to see what the heck is going on with their strategy. I mean, gosh, Medicare Advantage, you know, that I called about that. We were so upset about it. Right. We ended up getting able to stay on.
They forced the retirees
Medicare.
into it, right?
Yeah. Yes. And now they're speaking. They've already had 2 meetings with Trump down at Mar-a-Lago. Now the president of the Teamsters is speaking at O'Brien is speaking at the Republican convention.
Oh my God.
I know it. I'm like, can you get somebody on from Teamsters, preferably O'Brien, and find out what the hell is their strategy? I don't get what they're doing. Yeah. It is not that they're trying to help the working man.
No. Well, they represent, the Teamsters first and foremost represent truckers. And truckers listen to right-wing talk radio constantly. I mean, I'm guessing probably 90% of the truckers in America are fully indoctrinated in the right-wing sphere. Because you can't drive anywhere in America without tuning in a right-wing station. It's really hard to find left-wing stations. I mean, they're out there, but they're few and far between.
Well, and Tom,
so
the other
he may just be reflecting the politics of his membership. Not that I defend that, but I mean,
no. But
James Hoffa was a good Democrat. I don't know what happened when O'Brien took over. I haven't really followed the Teamsters. I used to know James Hoffa. I mean, he was on my program a number of times.
Yeah.
So, Mary, I got to run. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call and the heads up on what's going on with the Teamsters. It's sad to hear. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So like the song says, tag you're it. Get out there, get active. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Stay safe and don't get COVID. You don't want it. It was no fun. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.